For those of you who don't know, I'm JB's son, Geoff. Last night I went to see The Offspring and Pennywise, which is a punk rock concert, with my daughter Simone. In my day, there wasn't a lot of weed at punk rock concerts. But there wasn't a lot of weed in my day, but last night as I was there, I was thinking, I haven't smelled this much weed since the last time I was in my dad's living room. JB was an extraordinary person, and he accomplished extraordinary things. Most of you didn't know him for his whole life, and he didn't speak about his history very often. So I think it's a good idea if I share with you some of the things that he did, including contributions from others who speak about who he was and what he meant to them. JB was born in Winnipeg, Manitoba on January 4th, 1935. As a young boy, he watched paratroopers from the nearby Air Force base jump out of planes with parachutes before going to Europe to fight in the Second World War. In public school, he frequently got into trouble. He was a bookworm who had excellent marks, but had trouble with teachers and all authority figures. Even though he was raised an Anglican, he was sent to a Catholic private school away from home at age 10. As Catholic schools in the prairies were known for their harsh discipline, with the adults in his life hoped would break his attitude. Instead, it broke his heart, in the sense that he believed his mother didn't love him, or else she would have spared him the ordeal. His father was an engineer and became the chief engineer in Tommy Douglas's first socialist or CCF government in Saskatchewan. JB resented the lower income that came with serving the people of the province, and this may have planted the seeds of his far right-wing opinions. His brother was good with his hands and could help his father with company chores. JB was all thumbs. His family moved back to Winnipeg when JB was 14. He decided to transform himself from, and I quote, a little runt bookworm who was constantly picked on, into something else. He spent the whole summer working out, lifting weights, running, and reading books on fighting. When he joined his new school, he fought pretty much every day, and according to people who grew up with him, he won them all. I've had men much taller than 6 feet tall come over and introduce themselves to me, and then tell me how my father punched them out in high school. Several times, as they just couldn't believe that this little guy could beat them up. So they had to keep trying. He became the captain of the football team, the captain of the hockey team. His love affair with the CFL likely started about that time. He played catcher as a lefty for the best rep team in the city, but he also led a gang of greasers that would go out and get in fights on the weekend. He and some of his friends knocked out 30 streetlights with rocks one night and got caught. It turns out that JB, then known as Barry, had smashed all of them, his friends lacking throwing accuracy. This did not go well with his father, who was now the head of Manitoba Electricity. His father considered those his lights. JB retained straight A marks, but continued to get into trouble. Thank you. Getting kicked out of all the high schools in the city for fighting. At the end of high school, he signed a professional baseball contract with the St. Louis Cardinals and was assigned to play low A ball for their farm team in Amarillo, Texas. He was likely the shortest player they had ever signed. and that distinction might still hold true to this day. He'd already been accepted to the engineering faculty at UBC, but he wanted to delay going to university and simply play ball. His father gave him an ultimatum: go to university now, or I'll never pay for it. He took the train to UBC, where he joined a frat. Ironically, for the next 2 years, he worked during the summers near Amarillo, to lay a pipeline. Give you a chance, if I'm not going to use the mic, you can turn off the PA. Do you have the mic working?
Can I have the mic check?
I'm going to stop yelling.
Yeah.
Hello? Oh, that's much better. Okay, so I know those who know me out there are wondering, Geoff drinks water?
Clear beer.
Yeah, clear beer.
Working in Amarillo, Texas.
Right. At UBC, JB fell in love with Vancouver. And after his first year, he decided he didn't want to be an engineer. And he transferred into commerce, which was the business degree of the day. When he graduated, he went to Montreal, which was then the capital of business in Canada, to work with J. Walter Thompson in the media department. Thus began an illustrious career in advertising. Less than 6 years later, he was a vice president at McCann Erickson in Toronto, likely the youngest vice president ever in the industry in a major international advertising agency. He continued to move up the ladder over the years, working on pretty much every major brand in this country. He rose to the level of executive vice president. He was also elected to the board of directors of BBM, which was the dominant ratings company at the time, and was eventually elected the chair of BBM. He was asked at least twice in his career to become president and refused. He was asked to go to New York several times at much higher salaries, but he refused those offers. He didn't want to spend the extra time outside of work. That was because he was already very busy in an extracurricular sense. Well, at McCann Erickson, he married my mom, Gloria, and they had me. 7 years later, they both adopted Tanya. A few months later, my mom asked for a divorce. This request transformed JB from a man who at that point was an angry and sometimes violent person into a man capable of winning custody of a 7-year-old son. Something that was unheard of at the time, and frankly still is unusual. I was raised in what was mostly a two-person family for the next 15 years. JB coached me in baseball and hockey. Some of you were coached by him. He never missed a game in any sport that I played, and I played them all. In the 1960s, he moved to Oakville, where he bought a half-moon house that was unlike anything I have ever seen before or since. In Oakville, he became a volunteer in a youth drop-in center called Trailer House, where he discovered the joy of giving to others and his community. It was also where he met a bunch of young hippies who became his lifelong friends. His house became a place for all these young people to show up and smoke weed and have intellectual debates. JB on one side, the left-wing hippies on the other. He also found time to manage a rock band called Hot Ralston. He took me to see the Monkees and got to see Jimi Hendrix play live in the same strange show. He saw all the great bands of the era: Led Zeppelin, the Rolling Stones, there'll be more on that later, Pink Floyd, including, and many others. He even went to see the original Wall tour, which was only done in 2 cities, and went to New York to see it. He took me to every one of these shows except the Wall tour. He was always a rebel. He became the first person outside the creative department not to wear a tie. This happened at least a decade before the rest of the industry became more casual. And it's probably the reason that most of you are comfortable tonight. He hated ties. In fact, in my first job in the ad industry in 1991, I had to wear a tie. If you wanted JB on your account or in your company, you put up with the way he did things. And he was simply too good at creating results. You had to give in. A good friend of his from Hayhurst Advertising, John Arnold, sent me the following to read today. I have nothing but the deepest respect for the way that John transformed the media department into a major powerhouse, even if he couldn't contain Barb Elliott on her Christmas kissing spree.
Sorry, Geoff.
You'll hear more from Barb later. He was also a very good and respected teacher in the CAP course. My favorite JB anecdote occurred during our new business presentation to the Ontario Lottery Corporation. The deputy minister was in attendance and he wanted to make a change to the TV show that John was proposing. John fired back, "You can't do that." In his inimitable, oh, I can't say the damn thing, in his way. All the underlings at the ministry were shocked, including Marshal Pollock. No one ever told the deputy minister he couldn't do something. We won the account, and I believe that John's response was a major reason. I value John's friendship. Cheers, John Arnold. Sheer will of force. There was a lot of that in his life. In the 1970s, he met the love of his life, Kathy Kane, who became his second wife through common law. Well, they broke up after 6 years. He kept a photo of her visible wherever he lived until he died. JB moved back to Toronto in 1982, living in a luxury condo at Bayambour in Yorkville. His daughter Tanya moved back in with him at age 15. Hereafter, various snapshots of his life show us as a man with wide, wild, and varied interests, such as he met Keith Richards with his good friend Doug Shaw in Antigua. He also met the rest of the Rolling Stones and would frequent the Stones rehearsals when they would use a school in the East End of Toronto to rehearse before world tours. At least once he had a backstage pass for a Stones concert. He was the owner of a business that made mushrooms in Antigua for restaurants. No, not those mushrooms. And he was the executive producer of the first video of the island, first tourist video of the island. He owned the rights to all Charlie Brown and Garfield animated TV programming in Canada, which for a while was a major source of revenue for him, a very smart investment. He went with me behind the Iron Curtain in 1974 to watch the WHA version of the Canada-USSR Hockey Summit in the middle of the Cold War during the Brezhnev era. He was a Toronto Argonaut season ticket holder from 1960 until his passing. He attended Grey Cups in every city in the country except Edmonton, Winnipeg, and Regina, and that was because, as he said, sitting outside in the prairies in November is just stupid, even for the Super Bowl, even for the Grey Cup. He likely attended about 30 Grey Cups, and he also attended several Super Bowls as a guest of his client Nike. He became Canada's foremost industry prognosticator in the success and failure of new TV shows, and his good friend John Keyes, who was the editor of TV Guide magazine. For you young people in the audience, we used to have to look at a book to find out what was on TV. And that book was in most houses in Canada. JB would head to Los Angeles every March for 2 weeks to review the TV pilots before they hit the airwaves. He did this for about 15 years. JB and John's record of predicting the ratings success of a new program beat Advertising Age, the foremost American magazine in the industry, 14 years out of 15, and the 15th year was a tie. John Keyes, who now lives in Vancouver, sent in these thoughts about his old partner, and also the man on the street. And yet he was this tiny, feisty hippie who made 6 figures and smoked pot in his Yorkville high-rise condo. Much of his success, I think, was due to his sheer determination. Once he decided to understand an issue or a client's requirements or a friend's needs, and later a charity's mission, he would not rest until he achieved the desired result. After many years working together on our annual presentation to the advertising and marketing community, and by the way, JB loved the buzz and glamour of the event, probably because it was the only time of year we'd consent to wearing a tie, and a tuxedo bow tie at that. John moved to the West Coast, and he would visit occasionally. I will never forget the sight of JB leaning into the wind, hunkered down to his destination, whether he was going to shoot pool or buy grass, or go to see a movie, or check out a new restaurant or an old favorite. He wanted to get there now, just in case there was something around the corner he might miss if we dallied. I'm told that JB could be exasperating, but I never felt that burden. I think that anyone who truly loved him, as I did, will remember him the same way. You could not have a better guy in your corner or on your side. His clients knew that, and his friends sure did. He was a stand-up guy, even if he was only 5'3". Back in Toronto, Saatchi & Saatchi made JB a futurist, where his job was to write papers on developing trends. There he successfully predicted, things he successfully predicted were the multi-channel universe we see today on our TV sets, satellite and satellite radio. Both were completely radical concepts at the time. He taught the advertising industry CAP course for years and was a mentor to a generation of advertisers. He even retired with a story. He'd been brought to Harrison Young, Passonen and Newell, a very successful independent media buying house, to bring in a heavy hitter who wasn't a partner. He worked on the Acura account and the Nike account and Swiss Chalet and Harvey's and a whole bunch of others. They always wanted the whole Honda account, which was much bigger than Acura, but they couldn't get a foot in the door. Finally, Honda put the whole account up for bid, but it was viewed as basically a formality, and HYPN was viewed as an underdog. He was supposed to stay with the agency that already had it. He presented them with a post-dated check for 1 year later for $1 million. That would be by using their pre-buying strategy they developed, or conjunction buying for those who are actually in the industry. It was brash, it was there, and it was not approved by management. It was JB, and it worked. They assigned the whole $20 million account to his company. He was 59 and he saw an opportunity. He wanted an early retirement with 2 more years on payroll and a quick phase out of any real work. He went out as he came in on a high note. He then went to BC and studied acting, became an acting teacher, which he did first in BC and later in Toronto. Then there were grandchildren, Simone and Phoenix, and he devoted his life to them. I'm sure you'll hear from others about this, but he never missed anything that was important to either of them, ever. Soon after retirement, JB was introduced to MDI, a men's organization dedicated to the success of other men. That was a life-changing event for him. He relearned the service to others that had attracted him to the trailer house drop-in center in Oakville that he had been part of so many years before. He found a place where all that he learned from all these incredible life events could be shared with others. He became a mentor to hundreds of men throughout North America, but particularly in Ontario. He found a comfortable place, proudly inside my shadow, as I was the more senior leader in MDI. But he was also JB, and he could never really live inside any shadow. As MDI is also devoted to community service, he dove into giving back to the community full out. He was the male project leader for Stonegate, a project that took up thousands of hours of volunteer work and hundreds of thousands of dollars of donations to create an English as a second language community center in a lower income neighborhood south of Etobicoke. He recently became seriously involved in serving women's shelters, including North York's Women's Shelter, Yellow Brick House, and the Markham Shelter, among many. When he passed on July 25th, he was still the chief of staff of the men in Toronto and still mentoring and training many others to lead. couple of years ago, I had a call from him at 9:30 on a weekend morning. Most people know not to call me at 9:30. I am JV's son, particularly on a weekend morning. My father was about to lead part of an MDI leadership training. He turned an odd skin color, twitched a few times, and then came out of it. The men called 911, and he was whisked from Kitchener to the Cambridge Hospital in an ambulance. He felt fine. They did blood tests that were inconclusive, but the definitive blood test would take 3 hours. He figured he could go and deliver, back to Kitchener, deliver his 90-minute presentation, and be back in time for the results, and convince them to temporarily discharge him. So he was driven back, delivered his beloved training on the art of delegation, which will be running on screens around here, available for only $19.99 at jbt-enterprises.com. I'm actually serious. He just completed that days before the accident with his good friend Mark Ironside and others. And he was very, very excited about it. It is an excellent piece of work. But according to many men who were there at the time, it was an even better presentation than usual. These are men who had seen it several times. And it was always good. He then returned to the hospital. He was told he had a heart attack. Later had another heart attack, and he didn't even notice. He was proud of these things. And rightly so. He was the toughest son of a bitch I ever met. If anyone could make all these things happen that I've told you, if anyone could make all these things that I've told you true, it was my dad. He could make strange things happen by his sheer force of will. His force of will is what may be his defining characteristic. He made things happen, and he made sure that you felt like he cared about you when it happened. Unless you were in his way, and then not so much. He was a rare man, and his great friend told me recently, and I paraphrase, that Patrice is my great friend too. He filled any room he was in with his presence. He could be the greatest person you had ever met and the biggest asshole in the space of minutes. But you always forgave the asshole for the greatness and the size of his heart. There's lots more. I can't do it all. Others need to speak and share more about who he was and not just what he did. He truly was greatness. I am honored to be his son. Thank you.